The lie that loved betrayal and self-discovery. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would lose themselves so completely in someone else. I always imagined that when I fell in love, I'd hold on to myself too. My opinions, my space, my identity. But what no one tells you is that love doesn't ask permission before taking parts of you. It doesn't announce that it's shifting your axis. It arrives like a tide, and you only realize how far it's pulled you out to sea when the shore disappears. Before I met Mira, I believed I was immune to that kind of rapture. I was pragmatic, maybe even a little cynical, especially after watching my parents' marriage implode, slowly, like two tectonic plates drifting apart until only silence stood between them. But Mira was different. She was sunlight at midnight. The kind of beautiful that wasn't just in her face, but in the way she existed, as if the universe had given her extra hues the rest of us didn't have access to. She didn't just walk into my life. She rewrote it. I met her at a bookstore, the kind with a cafe attached and fairy lights strung above the poetry section. I was there hiding from the chaos of my own thoughts, thumbing through Neruda and pretending I still understood way I did at 17. She asked me if I'd read the author I was holding. I hadn't. She had. We sat down for coffee. That coffee turned into 3 hours, and then 3 hours became a habit. We didn't plan to fall in love. I think that's the most dangerous kind, the kind you never see coming. There was something about her curiosity that felt like a trap you wanted to fall into. She asked questions in a way that made you feel like your answers actually mattered. I found myself saying things I hadn't even admitted to myself yet. She laughed like it was the first time someone had ever told her a joke, every time. When she listened, she didn't interrupt or relate or advise. She just absorbed. She made me feel like the most interesting version of myself. It was addicting. We weren't perfect, not by any stretch. She could be impulsive, stubborn, reckless. I was overly cautious, constantly second-guessing. But somehow the friction became the spark. She'd drag me into spontaneous road trips, and I'd anchor her when her life got too messy. We complemented each other the way broken pieces sometimes do. Sharp in all the wrong places, but still fitting, still holding. At first, it was all small things. Her leaving her jacket at my place, me buying oat milk because she preferred it, her toothbrush slowly becoming a fixture in my bathroom. We didn't talk about what we were becoming. We didn't need to. It was obvious. She started calling my apartment Gores. I didn't correct her. When she laughed in her sleep, I'd stay awake just to listen. I had never loved like this. Fully, stupidly, without caution. I gave her everything I didn't even know I was allowed to give. I think that's where I began to vanish. Bit by bit, I stopped noticing my own reflection. Her problems became mine. Her chaos became my atmosphere. I justified the things that hurt, wrapped them in the language of love. When she forgot my birthday, she baked me a cake at midnight to make up for it. When she flirted with someone else at a party, she said it was harmless. When she disappeared for 2 days, she said she needed space. I told myself it was okay because love means compromise. Love means understanding. Love means staying. But deep down, something started to rot. It wasn't obvious at first. It crept in the way decay always does. Slow, silent, invisible. I began walking on eggshells around her moods. I hesitated before sharing anything that wasn't cheerful. My friends noticed before I did. "You're not yourself anymore," one of them said. I brushed it off. I was happy, wasn't I? Isn't that what love is supposed to look like? I didn't realize I had started lying. Not just to them. To myself. The first time I caught her lying was trivial. She said she was working late, but I ran into her at a bar on the other side of town. She smiled, unbothered, said she forgot to tell me. The second time, she swore she had cut ties with her ex, but I saw their messages. She said they were just catching up. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her, because if I didn't, the entire foundation of what we had built would crack. And I wasn't ready to admit I had built my life on sand. Still, I stayed. I told myself all couples have rough patches. I read articles about emotional labor and attachment styles. I bought books on how to communicate better. I went to therapy. She didn't. Why fix something that isn't broken? She asked once, and I didn't know how to say, because I am. The unraveling wasn't sudden. It was months of erosion, little lies, small betrayals, tiny dismissals that piled up until they buried me. And even then, I clung to the version of her that existed in the beginning. The Mira who loved poetry and made pancakes in the shape of moons. The Mira who kissed my forehead when I was half asleep and whispered, "You make the world feel less sharp." I held onto that Mira because admitting she was gone felt like admitting I had been wrong all along. Then one day, she left. No warning. Just a note on the fridge and a stack of her books missing from the shelf. "I need to find myself," she wrote. "This isn't about you." But it was. It was entirely about me. About the version of me I had let her erase. About the parts I silenced so I could be easier to love. About the man who thought he could fix something by bleeding for it. The silence after she left was deafening. Not just in my apartment, but in my soul. I realized I didn't even know what I liked anymore. What music made me feel something. What I believed in. What I wanted. I had been so consumed by us that I'd forgotten me. The hardest part wasn't losing her. It was losing myself and realizing how much of me I had given away for free. I spent the next few weeks in a daze. Waking up felt like being dropped into a body I didn't recognize. I'd make coffee and forget to drink it. I'd walk to the store and come back with nothing. The only thing I felt was the absence. Hers, mine, everything. People tried to comfort me, offered klitches wrapped in kindness. Time heals. Everything happens for a reason. But time isn't a healer, it's a mirror. It forces you to confront every version of yourself you ignored. I started journaling, not because I wanted to write, but because I needed to hear my own voice again. I wrote about the first time she touched my hand, the way her eyes sparkled when she lied, the way I willingly ignored every red flag because the high was worth the crash. I wrote until I found anger buried under the grief. I wrote until I could name the wound. And then, slowly, I began to stitch myself back together. I reconnected with old friends. I took solo walks with no destination. I deleted the photos, not out of spite but necessity. I stopped romanticizing pain. I started remembering who I was before she made me forget. And then one morning, as the sun slid through the curtains in a way that felt deliberate, I realized something. The love I thought I had lost didn't die. It just changed address. It moved inward. It came home, and for the first time in what felt like years, I was glad to meet myself again. It's strange how healing doesn't arrive with a declaration. There's no crescendo, no dramatic finale where you suddenly feel whole. It comes in quiet ways. In the moment you catch your reflection and don't look away. In the morning you wake up and realize you no longer count the days since they left. In the sigh you let out, not because you're tired, but because for once you're at peace. After Mira left, I thought the emptiness would eat me alive. But emptiness, I learned, is not always the enemy. Sometimes it's the space where you finally hear your own thoughts without interference. Sometimes it's the beginning of something quietly miraculous. I spent months in that silence, rebuilding routines from the rubble. I started cooking again. Not because she liked it, not because it was romantic, but because I enjoyed the rhythm of it. Chopping, sizzling, tasting. I took up swimming at the community pool. I wasn't good at it, but it felt like drowning and breathing at the same time, and that made sense to me. Grief is like that. You can't swim away from it. You have to move with it. At first, every lane I swam felt like punishment, a way to outpace the memory of her. But eventually, it became something else. A reclamation. I wasn't running anymore. I was moving forward. My therapist once told me, grief doesn't end when you let go of the person. It ends when you let go of the version of yourself that needed them. That haunted me for weeks. Because for the longest time, I didn't know who I was without her. But slowly, I began to rebuild the scaffolding of my life. I joined a local art class, not because I wanted to draw, but because I wanted to sit in a room full of people and not feel like a ghost. I filled sketchbooks with crooked buildings and misshapen faces, and I loved every imperfect page. I went to the movies alone. I even laughed out loud once, and it felt like rebellion. And then, unexpectedly, I met someone new. Not romantically, not at first. Her name was Clara. She was in the same art class, a graphic designer with a laugh that bubbled up like a secret. We bonded over terrible shading techniques and our shared inability to draw hands. She was kind, but not the kind that demanded attention. She was subtle, like rain tapping on a window you didn't know was open. We started walking home together after class. It wasn't planned. It just became routine. She didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. She didn't dig into my past or try to fix me. She simply showed up, consistently without expectation. One evening, as we sat at a quiet cafe sketching strangers, she said something I'll never forget. "I think the most dangerous kind of love is the one that teaches you to shrink." It was like she had read my autopsy. I didn't respond, but something cracked open inside me. Not painfully, gently, like a window unlatched after years of rust. Clara didn't replace Mira. That wasn't possible. But she reminded me that connection could be soft. That care didn't have to come wrapped in chaos. We didn't rush. We didn't label. Some nights we sat in silence, sipping tea and listening to playlists we curated together. Other nights we argued over which film director was overrated. It was simple. And after everything, simplicity felt like luxury. One afternoon, while organizing a drawer I hadn't opened in ages, I found an old letter Mira had written to me but never sent. It was folded neatly behind a stack of postcards. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, unsure if I was ready for whatever truth lay inside. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, but every word was a mirror. She wrote about how she had known, deep down, that she wasn't ready to be loved the way I loved her. How she had felt suffocated not by me, but by her own inability to be honest. She said she left because she saw the damage she was doing and she couldn't live with it anymore. She said, "I wanted to be someone better for you, but I kept choosing to be someone familiar for myself." I read it twice, and then a third time. But instead of the heartbreak I expected, I felt clarity. It didn't excuse the pain. It didn't undo the lies. But it gave the story an ending. Not the one I wanted, but maybe the one I needed. Closure doesn't always come in a conversation. Sometimes it comes in silence, or in an unsent letter, or in the way you stop checking their social media at midnight. Sometimes closure isn't about forgiving them. It's about forgiving yourself for staying too long. I folded the letter and tucked it into a book I knew I'd never reread. Not to forget, but to archive. Some things don't need to be carried forever. Around that time, Clara invited me to an exhibit she was part of. I didn't know what to expect. I wandered through the gallery, admiring pieces from strangers until I reached hers. It was a series of sketches, all soft lines and empty spaces. Beneath one of them was a quota: "Healing isn't loud. It's quiet, like learning to sit in your own silence and liking the sound." I felt tears prick my eyes. Not from pain, but from resonance. I realized I wasn't mourning Mira anymore. I was mourning the version of me who thought he didn't deserve better. That version had finally died, and in his place stood someone new. Someone honest. Someone whole. One evening, Clara and I sat on a rooftop, the city lights flickering like static beneath us. She looked over and said, "Do you ever think about her?" I nodded. Sometimes. But it's like remembering a dream. You don't know if it really happened or if you just imagined it differently. She didn't press. She just leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there, letting the breeze carry away the parts of us we no longer needed. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if Clara and I are meant to last or if this, too, is temporary. But I've stopped searching for permanence in people. Love doesn't have to be forever to be meaningful. It just has to be real. And this quiet, kind, steady thing we're building feels more real than anything I've ever known. Sometimes I still hear Mira's laugh in my dreams. Sometimes I still think about the boy I was when I met her, so eager to be chosen that I forgot how to choose myself. But I no longer hate that boy. He was just doing the best he could with what he knew. And now, finally, I know better. I know that love isn't supposed to leave you questioning your worth. I know that real love doesn't ask you to become someone else. It finds you exactly as you are and stays anyway. I know that I am allowed to take up space, to have needs, to be messy and still be loved. And most of all, I know that the most important relationship I will ever have is the one I have with myself. The lie that loved me broke me, but the truth I built after is what saved me. Some people think healing is a straight line, like a staircase you climb until you reach a place where everything makes sense again. But I've come to learn it's more like a spiral. You circle the same memories, pass by the same ghosts, return to the same wounds. But each time, you meet them a little differently. Not healed, but healing. Not unscathed, but stronger. I thought I had moved on from Mira, and for the most part I had. But grief is sneaky. It lingers in muscle memory and favorite songs. It waits in the corners of coffee shops and old t-shirts. It doesn't announce its return, it just arrives dressed in nostalgia. One morning, nearly a year after she left, I received an email from her. The subject line was blank. My hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure whether to open it or delete it. I had promised myself I wouldn't let her back in. Not after everything I had survived. But curiosity is its own kind of wound. I clicked. It wasn't long. Just 2 sentences. I saw your artwork in Clara's exhibit. I hope you're doing well. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just a gentle tap on the glass of my life, as if to say, I still exist. For a moment, I stared at the words, unsure what to feel. Part of me felt exposed, like she had been watching from afar, slipping through cracks I thought were sealed. Another part of me felt nothing at all, and maybe that was the biggest surprise. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The chapter had already closed, and yet, for the rest of the day, her name echoed in my mind like a song I didn't want to remember but couldn't quite forget. That night, Clara noticed I was quiet. We were making pasta together, the way we often did on Thursdays. She was humming, twirling noodles around a fork, and I was watching the way her hair caught the light. I didn't tell her about the email, not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't want to give it more power than it deserved. Mira was part of my past. Clara was my present. But even as I told myself that, something inside me shifted. A memory surfaced, me and Mira on the floor of my old apartment, eating Chinese takeout from paper boxes, laughing about how we'd forgotten forks and were using pens to scoop rice. It was a stupid, happy moment. One that didn't belong to the version of her that hurt me. One that made me realize, you can love someone and still know they're wrong for you. You can cherish a memory without wanting the person back. But it also made me wonder, had I really let her go? Or had I just buried the feelings deep enough not to trip over them? That question stayed with me, lingering like a shadow at the edge of a candle. Clara and I were growing closer. We hadn't said I love you yet, but it was there. In the way she folded my clothes without asking, in the way I memorized her coffee order, in the way our silences were comfortable, not empty. We didn't rush anything. After the wreckage of my last relationship, slow felt like safety. One Sunday afternoon, Clara invited me to meet her parents. I hesitated. Not because I wasn't ready, but because something about the invitation made the relationship feel suddenly real in a way I hadn't prepared for. Mira had met my parents once, briefly. It had been awkward. My mother said Mira had a beautiful sadness to her which I didn't understand until much later. With Clara, everything felt easier. Her family lived in a small town 2 hours away in a yellow house with wind chimes and a porch swing. Her mother baked too much. Her father told terrible jokes. Her younger brother asked if I was the one. We laughed. But inside something clenched. The one. I hadn't thought about that in a long time. When I got home that night, I sat alone on the couch, scrolling through old photos I had thought I'd deleted. There we were, me and Mira on a rooftop at dusk, our silhouettes soft against the setting sun. It was a lie of a photo. We had fought that day, one of the worst fights, but the picture didn't show that. Photos don't capture silence, or the sting of betrayal, or the ache of being misunderstood. They just show smiles, shadows, light. I closed my phone. I looked around my apartment, noticing how much of it had changed. New art on the walls, different throw pillows, Clara's books stacked on the windowsill, but also pieces of me I had reclaimed. My guitar untouched for years, now back in use. My notebooks, once filled with Mira, now filled with lyrics and half-poems. Healing isn't about replacing someone. It's about re-inhabiting yourself. One evening, Clara found a poem I had written. It was tucked into a sketchbook I'd forgotten to hide. She didn't ask whose name it was about. She just handed it to me and said, "It's beautiful, and it's okay if it still hurts." I stared at her, stunned. Not because she was okay with my past, but because she didn't ask to compete with it. Mira had always needed to be the center. Clara was content being present. That night, I told her about the email, about how it stirred things I thought were dormant. She didn't flinch. She just said, "It's part of your story. I'm not afraid of it." I think I loved her a little more in that moment. Not because she accepted my baggage, but because she didn't try to unpack it for me. In the weeks that followed, I wrote more than I had in years. I started recording songs again, raw and unfinished, but mine. I played them for Clara, and she cried during one, the one I never meant to share. She said it made her feel seen. I realized then that art doesn't have to be perfect to matter. It just has to be honest. One night, Clara and I went dancing. It was her idea. Some retro-themed night at a local bar. I was hesitant. Dancing hadn't exactly been my thing. But she dragged me to the floor, and I followed. At first awkward, then freer. We spun in circles under flickering lights, laughing like children. And for a moment, time folded. I wasn't the man who had been left. I wasn't the boy who had begged for scraps of affection. I was just me, moving, laughing, alive. When we got home, she kissed me softly and whispered, "I love you." It caught me off guard. Not because I didn't feel the same, but because I realized I hadn't said those words without pain attached in years. I whispered it back, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because I meant it. And that night, as we fell asleep tangled in each other, I understood something vital. Love isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about choosing what's real. Mira was a lesson. Clara was a choice. And I was finally learning to choose myself too. But healing, like I said, is a spiral. And some ghosts aren't gone. They just rest. I didn't know it then, but the past wasn't finished with me yet. Another twist waited just beyond the corner. And when it arrived, it wouldn't knock. It would burst in, dragging secrets I thought were buried. And this time, the lie wouldn't come from Mira. It would come from someone far closer. If I'd learned anything by now, it was that peace is not a place you stay in. It's a place you pass through. Like a small town on the way to somewhere else, beautiful in its quiet, but never meant to hold you forever. After I said, "I love you," to Clara, something shifted in the atmosphere around us. It wasn't that things got worse. In fact, they were almost too good, too smooth, too synchronized. As if we had both rehearsed our lines 100 times before stepping on stage. There was no friction, no cracks, and it was precisely that perfection that began to unsettle me. Because life isn't seamless. It's sharp edges, contradictions, missteps. I'd come to trust the mess, to find truth in it. But Clara and I weren't messy. We were polished, controlled, and deep down something in me began to itch. I told myself I was overthinking. Trauma does that. It makes you suspicious of calm, like waiting for a storm that never comes. But then the small signs began to appear. One evening I noticed her phone screen light up while she was in the shower. A name I didn't recognize, Elliot. The message was short. "Miss you too." I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. The words burned into my mind like a brand. I told myself not to spiral. We all have friends, past lives, inside jokes. But something about the way Clara quickly flipped her phone face down when she returned made the doubt stretch its legs. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched her silhouette beside me, rising and falling with each breath, and wondered if I'd walked straight into a different version of the same story. Was this another lie wrapped in love? Or was I too damaged to recognize safety when I saw it? The next day I asked her, casually, who Elliot was. She smiled, almost too easily. Old friend from college. He moved to Berlin. We catch up sometimes. She said it without flinching. No hesitation. I nodded, pretending that was enough. But it wasn't. Something had settled in my chest like smoke. I didn't check her phone. I didn't pry. I just watched. Listened. And slowly, things started to align in uncomfortable ways. She stayed later at work. She guarded her messages more closely. She mentioned things, restaurants, films, that I knew we hadn't talked about, as if continuing conversations I wasn't part of. I began to feel like a guest in my own relationship. Present, but peripheral. Still, I said nothing. I was terrified of being wrong, of accusing her unfairly, of becoming the paranoid partner I promised I'd never be. But the silence between us grew teeth. One evening, I was sitting in our living room, sketching alone. She came in late, cheeks flushed, hair slightly damp. Said she'd gone for a run. I nodded. She kissed the top of my head. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I lied. She went to shower. I stared at the front door, still unlocked. Something in me cracked. I went to her laptop. She often used it for work and left it open. I didn't plan to. I just did. Her email was up. I typed Elliot in the search bar. What I found didn't just confirm my fears, it rewrote them. Dozens of messages, some recent, some going back months. But what struck me wasn't that they were romantic. They weren't. They were confessional, raw, honest in a way that felt deeper than love. She had told him things about me, about us, about her doubts, her fears, her past. She wrote things like, "He's kind, he's safe, but sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life." Or, "I miss the fire, the chaos, even if it hurt." And then this, with Elliot. I felt seen. With him, I didn't have to perform. I sat there, numb. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just gutted. Because those were things I had once said about Mira. And now they were being said about me. I was the one being compared, measured, found lacking. Clara came out of the shower, towel around her neck, humming softly. I closed the laptop gently. She kissed my forehead. "You're quiet," she said. "Just tired," I replied. That night I lay beside her, fully awake, realizing the truth I didn't want to name. I was in love with someone who loved someone else. Maybe not in the way she loved me, but enough for it to hurt. Enough to fracture what we had. The next morning, I packed a bag. I didn't plan to leave, not permanently, but I needed space, to think, to feel without pretending. Clara was making coffee when I walked out of the bedroom. "Going somewhere?" she asked. I nodded. "Just a few days. I need to clear my head." She didn't argue. She just stared at me for a long time, then said, "Okay." I went to stay with my sister. She didn't ask questions. Just gave me a spare key and a quiet place to unravel. I spent 2 nights barely eating, staring at ceilings, listening to old songs I hadn't touched since Mira. On the 3rd day, Clara texted, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, then replied, "Not yet." I didn't know what I wanted to say. I didn't know what I felt. Hurt. Betrayed? Replaced. Or maybe just sad. Because love had once again slipped through my fingers, this time wearing a different mask. On the 5th day, I went back. Not to fight. Not to accuse. But to understand. She was waiting in the living room, sitting cross-legged like a child. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. "I didn't cheat on you," she said before I could speak. "I know," I said. But something happened?" She nodded. "I didn't mean for it to. He's part of my story. I thought I was done with it, but I wasn't." "You told him things you didn't tell me." Her lips trembled. "Because I didn't want to break us. Because I was scared that saying it out loud would make it real. That you didn't want this that I didn't know who I was without him. We sat in silence, two people unraveling quietly in the middle of a life they built together. "What didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I wanted to love you the way you deserved." And I did. I swear I did. But there was a part of me still stuck in the past. I didn't realize how loud that part had gotten. I nodded. I believed her. And that's what made it worse, because love without lies is hard to find. But love without wholeness is a slow bleed. "What now?" she whispered. I looked around the apartment. Our photos. Our plants. The books we read side by side. And I felt a wave of exhaustion I hadn't known I was carrying. "I don't know," I said. "But I can't be someone else's safe place while they're dreaming of somewhere else." She broke down. I didn't hold her. Not because I was angry, but because sometimes you have to let people fall apart without catching them, so they learn what their pieces really are. That night, I left again. This time, I didn't know if I'd come back. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove the night into myself, into the truth I was finally ready to face. I had been chosen, but not fully. Loved, but not completely. Held, but not seen. And the scariest part, I had accepted it, again, and that realization hurt more than any betrayal ever could. Because this time, the lie didn't come from her. It came from me. There's a quiet that settles after a loss. Not the chaotic grief that arrives first, with all its sobbing and bargaining, but the stillness that follows days later. It's the silence of space you once shared, of routines now disrupted. I found myself drifting through my sister's apartment like a ghost. I made coffee and forgot to drink it. I opened books and didn't read a single line. The noise in my head was relentless, yet nothing on the outside moved. For the first time in years, I didn't know how to anchor myself. Clara had never lied to me, not in the way Mira did. And maybe that's what made it worse. There wasn't an obvious villain this time. No betrayal to point at. No dramatic ending. Just a slow truth. She didn't know herself well enough to love someone else completely. And I didn't know how to stop falling for people who were half in, half out. I'd become the kind of man who mistook fragments for wholeness, and that realization echoed louder than any argument ever could. I stayed away for a while. I didn't count the days. I deleted her number, not in anger, but as a boundary. I didn't block her. I just stopped inviting the H. I spent time with old friends, the kind who don't ask for explanations. I started journaling again, long pages filled with thoughts I never intended to say out loud. I even wrote letters I never sent. To Mira, to Clara, to the version of me that kept trying to be enough for people who didn't know what they needed. One afternoon, I found myself at the bookstore where I had first met Mira. The fairy lights were still up. The smell of old paper and bitter coffee still clung to the walls. But the poetry section felt smaller now, less magical. Or maybe I had just outgrown the fantasy. I thumbed through a volume of Rainer Maria Rilke. A note fell from between the pages. Someone else's, scribbled in pencil. "Don't romanticize absence. People leave because they choose to." I stood there, stunned. It felt like a message from a stranger who had read my mind. I bought the book, not for the poems, but for the truth that had fallen out of it. That night, I went back to my own apartment, the one Clara and I had shared. It felt like a museum. Everything preserved, but no longer alive. I didn't expect to see her. I didn't want to, but I needed to reclaim the space. I opened windows, let the stale air out, took down the photos, packed her things into boxes, carefully, respectfully. No anger, just a quiet goodbye. Among her things, I found a notebook. I hesitated, then opened it. It wasn't a journal. It was a list. Pages and pages of questions. Who am I without someone else? Do I love him or the way he makes me feel about myself? Why do I keep returning to people who hurt me? She had been trying to figure herself out all along, just like me, and somehow, in that recognition, the bitterness softened. We were mirrors of each other, not enemies. Both of us searching, both of us unfinished. I placed the notebook on top of her things and taped the box shut. Closure, I was learning, wasn't a door slamming shut. It was a slow walk away from a house you once called home. I started rebuilding. For real this time. Not to distract myself. Not to prove I was over it. But to create a life that didn't depend on someone else's love to feel full. I picked up my guitar again. Played in a local open mic night. I was shaky, unsure. But when I finished, someone in the crowd said, "Thank you." That made me feel less alone, and for the first time in months, I believed my pain had a purpose. I started running not from grief but with it, through quiet trails, across city bridges, into mornings where the air still tasted like possibility. I called my parents more, took my nephew to the park, volunteered at a local youth center teaching art. These weren't dramatic gestures. They were small, consistent acts of coming back to myself. I even started dating again, slowly, cautiously. I met people for coffee. I laughed. I learned to enjoy a conversation without turning it into a future. I learned that not every connection has to mean forever. Sometimes it's enough for it to mean today. But even as I moved forward, there was a part of me that remained cautious, guarded. A door left slightly ajar, not out of hope, but out of memory. Then, on a rainy Thursday, I got a call I wasn't expecting, an unfamiliar number. I let it ring. They called again. I picked up. Is this Liam?" The voice asked. I froze. Only 2 people ever called me Liam. Mira was one of them. And this voice didn't belong to Clara? "Who's this?" I asked. A pause. Then, "This is Elliot." My pulse kicked. Clara's friend. Another pause. "I'm sorry to bother you. I thought you should know. Clara's been in an accident." The world tilted. My breath caught. "She's okay, I think. She was conscious. But she asked for you." "Only you?" I don't remember hanging up. I just remember running. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fluorescent lights. I found her in a small room, IV in her arm, bruises blooming across her collarbone. She looked fragile in a way I'd never seen. Still beautiful. Still Clara. But stripped of pretense. When our eyes met, neither of us spoke. She didn't cry. Neither did I. I just sat beside her and took her hand. Cold, trembling, real. I didn't know who else to call. She whispered, "You didn't have to." We sat like that for a long time. No explanations. No apologies, just breath, connection, truth. Later, after the doctor came and went, she said, "I thought I could handle everything on my own. But the truth is, I never wanted to." "You don't have to," I said. "Not anymore." And I meant it. Not because I was hers again, not because we were fixing anything, but because love, real love, isn't always about staying. Sometimes it's about showing up when it matters most. Even if only once more. She was discharged that evening. I took her home, not ours, not anymore, but her new place. Simple, honest. She made tea. I watched her from across the table. No illusions left, just 2 people scarred and learning. "I'm sorry," she said. "For the emails, for the distance, for not knowing how to be with you while still figuring out who I was." "I know," I said. "I wasn't perfect either, Ba." "You were," she whispered. And that terrified me. I smiled, sad and soft. I wasn't, but I tried. She reached across the table, took my hand again. "Do you think we could ever?" I shook my head gently. "I think we already had what we were meant to." She nodded. No tears this time, just understanding. And that was enough. I walked home alone. The rain had stopped. The streetlights shimmered in puddles. I felt lighter, not healed but human. Not whole but honest. And in that moment, I realized the lie that loved me had never really been about Mira or Clara. It had been the lie I told myself, that I had to earn love by sacrificing pieces of who I was. But now, I was done with that. I was learning to love from the center of myself, not the edge. And maybe, just maybe, that was the truest thing I'd ever done. They say time heals all wounds, but that's only true if you let it. Healing isn't about erasing scars. It's about learning to carry them without shame, without pain that controls you. After Clara's accident, after all the apologies that were said and unsaid, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I thought I had finally broken the cycle, the endless spiral of love and loss, trust and betrayal. hope and despair. But life has a way of reminding you that the truth isn't ever simple. Several months passed. Clara recovered slowly but fully, her old spark dimmed but not extinguished. We rebuilt a cautious friendship, not the passionate love we once had, but something quieter, grounded in respect and shared history. I continued my music, my art, my work with the youth center. I was learning to find joy in the small moments again. Then, one crisp autumn evening, my phone buzzed with a message that stopped my heart cold. It was from Mira. Not a casual hello, not a vague, "I hope you're well," but a question that shattered everything I thought I knew. "Can we meet? I have to tell you something." I stared at the screen. My mind raced. After all this time, after everything that happened with Clara and the accident, why now? Why after all these years? I didn't respond immediately. I debated. What could she possibly have left to say? Was this a reopening of old wounds or a chance for closure? The next morning, I agreed. We met at a small cafe. Neutral ground. I arrived early, nerves thrumming beneath my skin. When she walked in, the years melted away. Same eyes, same crooked smile, but something in her held tighter now. A guardedness I hadn't seen before. She sat down across from me, took a deep breath. "I'm sorry for everything," she began, voice steady but soft. "I never told you the whole truth." I nodded, bracing myself. Back then, when I left, it wasn't just because I was scared or lost. It was because, she paused, because I was running from someone. I blinked, confused. "Someone? What do you mean?" Mira looked down, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. Wasn't just about us or my fear of commitment. There was someone else involved. A man. Someone dangerous. My mind spun. Dangerous how? I got mixed up with someone who wasn't good news. Someone I thought I could help, but he pulled me into things I couldn't escape. She swallowed hard. That's why I lied. That's why I disappeared. Suddenly, pieces clicked into place. The unexplained disappearances, the frantic late night calls I never answered, the fear that lurked behind her smiles. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was protecting you," she said quietly. "Because I thought if you knew, you'd be in danger too." I leaned back, stunned. The love I thought had been just a story of two flawed people was actually tangled in something far more complicated. "Why tell me now?" She looked me in the eyes. "Because he's gone. I'm safe. And because you deserve to know why I couldn't stay." The weight of her words settled between us, heavy but somehow freeing. I realized then that the lie that loved me was never about me at all. It was about fear, survival, and the impossible choices we make to protect ourselves and others. We talked for hours, not about rekindling what was lost, but about forgiveness of each other and ourselves. When I left the cafe that night, I felt a strange peace. The past wasn't rewritten, but it was understood, and that made all the difference. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking less about Clara and more about the man Mira had run from, about the shadows we all carry hidden beneath the surface of our stories, about the lies we tell not to hurt others, but to keep ourselves alive. One evening, as I sat by the window strumming my guitar, Clara called. "I've been thinking," she said, "about us, about what we lost." I hesitated, but this time I was ready. "Maybe we're not meant to be," I said gently, "but maybe we can be better as friends." She sighed, relief palpable in her voice. "I'd like that." And just like that, the final chapter began. Not with passion or heartbreak, but with quiet understanding. With respect for the journeys we each had to take alone, and the grace to walk beside each other when paths crossed again. Love, I learned, is not just the fire that burns and consumes. Sometimes, it's the steady flame that warms us through the cold. The lie that loved me had been painful, but it was never the whole story. The truth was more complicated, more human, and ultimately, more freeing. I closed my eyes and smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Not because I was loved perfectly, but because I had learned to love myself through every lie, every loss, and every unexpected truth. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.